My ex drained my savings while I supported her career for years, then left me broke, so I cut contact, filed papers and rebuilt quietly. I'm a 26-year-old guy, and for most of my early adulthood, I honestly believed loving someone meant making their dreams possible, even if it meant shrinking my own life to do it. I met my ex when she was all ambition and anxiety, the kind of person who talked fast about the future but looked exhausted by the present. She told me she was chasing a career that would pay off for both of us one day, and the way she said both of us made it feel like a promise, not just a plan. Back then, I was working full-time, clocking in early and coming home late, while she bounced between classes, unpaid internships, and networking events that always seemed to end after midnight. I remember her collapsing onto the couch, shoes kicked off, saying, "I hate that I can't contribute more right now," and me answering without thinking, "That's my job. You just focus." It felt noble. It felt grown up. I slowly became the financial backbone of our relationship without ever sitting down and deciding to be. Rent came out of my account. Groceries, utilities, surprise expenses, all mine. When her laptop broke, I replaced it. When she needed just a little help attending a conference, I called it an investment. I didn't keep track because love wasn't supposed to feel like accounting. She thanked me constantly. She called me her rock in front of friends, squeezed my hand and said, "I couldn't do this without you." At night, lying in bed, she'd trace circles on my chest and talk about the life we'd have once she made it. House. Stability. Breathing room. I was proud of myself in a quiet way. Proud that I could carry the weight. Proud that I could be dependable. But I was also tired, bone-deep tired, and I told myself that exhaustion was temporary. Sacrifice, I believed, was proof I was doing love the right way. I didn't realize then that comfort only ever flowed in one direction, and that I was already giving more than I could afford to lose. I didn't notice the moment I stopped being a boyfriend and became a safety net. There was no conversation, no agreement, no clear line where things changed, it just happened. One bill at a time. One, "Can you cover this just for now," layered on top of the last. At first, it felt natural, almost automatic, like this was what you did when you loved someone who was struggling. Her expenses kept growing as her career demands grew. New clothes for events. Transportation. Software subscriptions she said were essential. Every request came wrapped in logic. This helps me get ahead. This will pay off later. This is temporary. And every time I hesitated, even for a second, I felt selfish for questioning it. I'd hear my own voice say, "Yeah, that's fine," before I'd even checked my balance. I stopped saving without making a conscious decision to stop. The account I'd opened for my future just stalled. Every month there was something more urgent, something that mattered right now. I told myself I could focus on myself later, once things settled down. They never did. She had a way of making me feel guilty without raising her voice. If I hesitated, she'd sigh and say, "I just hate asking you. I know you already do so much." Or, "I wouldn't need help if things weren't so intense right now." Suddenly I wasn't deciding whether to spend money, I was deciding whether to be supportive or disappointing. I remember sitting at the kitchen table late one night, the room lit by a single overhead bulb, staring at my banking app while she slept in the other room. My chest felt tight, but I closed the app anyway. I didn't want to be the guy who made money an issue. I didn't want to be another stress in her life. So I stayed quiet. I kept paying. I kept telling myself this was teamwork, that we were building something together. What I didn't understand yet was how slowly you can be drained when love is used as the excuse, and how easy it is to miss the damage when it happens inch by inch. The promises were what kept me quiet. Every time the pressure started to feel too heavy, she'd pull me back in with the future. Marriage. Shared finances. Once I'm established, things will finally be even. She talked about it so confidently that I never questioned whether even actually meant equal, or just less inconvenient for her. She'd sit across from me on the couch, laptop balanced on her knees, eyes glowing with excitement, and say things like, "Just imagine us a year from now." Sometimes she'd laugh and add, "You'll finally get to relax then." I held on to those words more than I should have. They made every sacrifice feel temporary, like I was just paying an entry fee for a life that was already promised to me. Friends noticed before I did. One of them pulled me aside after a dinner and said, "Man, it feels like you're doing everything." I brushed it off instantly. "It's just a phase," I said. "She's working towards something big." I defended her like it was my responsibility, like questioning her meant betraying her. There were moments, though, quiet ones, where anxiety crept in. Standing in the checkout line, hoping my card wouldn't decline. Waking up in the middle of the night doing mental math I didn't want to admit I was doing. I'd feel that knot in my stomach and immediately shut it down. This is what commitment looks like, I told myself. Real partners don't keep score. Anytime money came up, she'd wave it away. "Why stress about numbers?" she'd say. "We're on the same team." And I wanted to believe that so badly that I stopped asking questions. I stopped needing clarity. I stopped needing proof. Looking back, what scares me isn't how much I gave, it's how completely I trusted. I never imagined love could be used as leverage, or that someone could talk about our future while quietly securing only their own. At that point, I still believed every word she said. I still believed patience would be rewarded. I didn't realize yet that the future she kept describing had less and less space for me in it. The first signs didn't come as a big explosion. They came as small, uncomfortable moments I tried to explain away. A charge I didn't recognize. A transfer I didn't remember approving. At first, I assumed it was my mistake, maybe I forgot, maybe I miscalculated. I wanted it to be my fault because the alternative felt worse. I started noticing withdrawals that didn't line up with anything we'd talked about. When I asked casually, trying to sound relaxed, she'd answer too fast. "Oh, that was for work stuff." Or, "I told you about that already." Her eyes wouldn't quite meet mine when she said it. The room would go quiet in that way where you feel like you're standing on thin ice. Asking questions suddenly felt dangerous. Not because she yelled, but because her tone changed. She'd cross her arms and say, "Why are you interrogating me?" Or, "Do you not trust me?" Just like that, the conversation wasn't about money anymore. It was about my character. Her gratitude faded, replaced by expectation. Bills weren't requests anymore, they were assumed. If I hesitated, even slightly, she'd look at me like I'd failed some unspoken test. "I thought you supported me," she said once, her voice low and tight. I remember feeling my chest burn with shame, even though I couldn't explain why. At the same time, other things shifted. She stayed out later. Took calls in the other room. Conversations felt shorter, clipped, like she was always distracted. I'd sit at the kitchen table listening to the hum of the fridge, waiting for her to come home, replaying every interaction in my head. When I finally tried to push for clarity, just numbers, just transparency, she snapped. "You're being controlling," she said. "I can't do this if you're going to micromanage me." The word controlling hit harder than I expected. It made me question myself instantly. So I backed off. I apologized. I told myself I was overreacting. But that night, lying awake beside her, staring at the ceiling in the dark, I felt something new settle in my chest. A quiet, heavy feeling that told me something wasn't right, and that ignoring it might cost me more than money. She didn't pull away all at once. It was slow enough that I kept second-guessing myself, asking if I was imagining it. Affection became inconsistent. Some days she was warm and talkative, other days distant, like her body was present but her attention was somewhere else. I learned not to ask what was wrong, because the answer was always, "I'm just tired," said in a way that shut the door on the conversation. Intimacy faded quietly. Not dramatically, no big fight, no announcement. Just fewer touches. Shorter kisses. Nights where she turned away and scrolled on her phone while I lay there staring at the ceiling fan, listening to it click softly with every rotation. When I brought it up once, carefully, she sighed and said, "I just have a lot on my plate right now." I nodded, even though my chest felt tight. Her world kept expanding, and mine kept shrinking. She talked non-stop about colleagues, mentors, and networking events, names I heard so often I felt like I knew them. She'd come home energized, telling stories I wasn't part of, while I worried about bills and deadlines. I started eating dinner alone more often, the house quiet except for the TV I wasn't really watching. I felt resentment creep in, and I hated myself for it. I told myself I was jealous of her success, that this discomfort was my own insecurity. When I tried to express how exhausted I felt, she dismissed it quickly. "You're strong," she said. "You can handle it." Somehow that sentence, meant as praise, felt like a trap. Money was still flowing out, but emotionally, she was already gone. Conversations became transactional: who paid what, who needed what, who was busy. I felt less like a partner and more like a resource. Still, I stayed. I told myself things would improve once her career stabilized, once the pressure eased. But late at night, when the apartment was dark and quiet, I'd sit on the edge of the bed and feel this hollow space growing inside me. It felt like waiting for someone who had already left. I didn't know it yet, but the distance I felt wasn't temporary. It was preparation, for something I wasn't ready to face. The midpoint came on a random afternoon, triggered by something stupid and small, a banking alert I almost ignored. I was at work, phone buzzing in my pocket, and when I glanced down, I saw a notification about a low balance warning. That didn't make sense. I had just been paid. My stomach dropped in a way I couldn't explain. I locked myself in a bathroom stall and opened my banking app, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. At first, I told myself it was a glitch. Then I started scrolling. Transaction after transaction. Transfers I didn't recognize. Withdrawals that were just small enough to avoid attention, repeated over and over. My hands actually started shaking as I went further back, pulling months, then years. That's when it hit me, I hadn't just been supporting her. I'd been bleeding. Slowly. Quietly. I saw money I thought I'd saved for emergencies, for us, gone. Conference fees I never attended. Subscriptions I never used. Purchases labeled vaguely, deliberately unclear. I leaned my head against the cold tile wall and tried to breathe. When I got home that night, the apartment smelled like her perfume and takeout. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling, looking relaxed in a way that made my chest ache. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I just sat across from her and said, "Can we go over the finances together? I think something's wrong." She barely looked up. "What do you mean?" I showed her the numbers. I expected surprise. Maybe embarrassment. Maybe an apology. Instead, her face hardened. "Why are you digging through everything like that?" she asked. No concern. No explanation. I told her I was scared. That I didn't recognize my own accounts anymore. She crossed her arms and said, "You're overreacting. This is what support looks like." The way she said it, flat, annoyed, made my stomach twist. That was the moment something cracked open inside me. Not anger. Not even sadness. Clarity. I realized I cared more about understanding the truth than protecting her feelings, and that terrified me. She stood up, grabbed her bag, and said, "I can't deal with this right now." As the door closed behind her, the apartment felt unbearably quiet. And for the first time, I understood that the numbers weren't the worst part. It was how little my fear seemed to matter to her. She didn't come home that night. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened, moving around the apartment with a tight smile that made my skin crawl. When I tried to bring the conversation back up, she sighed loudly, like I was a chore she didn't have time for. "I've been thinking about this," she said, pouring coffee, not looking at me, "and I feel really attacked." That word, attacked, hit me sideways. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't accused her of stealing. I had shown her numbers and said I was scared. Somehow, that had turned me into the problem. She told me I was stressing her out at a critical point in her career. That my timing was selfish. That I knew how much pressure she was under, and yet I was making it about money. I tried to explain that it was about survival. About stability. About trust. She shook her head and said, "You offered to help. I never forced you." Then she added, almost casually, "If you were keeping score this whole time, that's on you." I felt like the floor dropped out from under me. Every concern I raised got twisted. If I asked for transparency, I was controlling. If I asked for accountability, I was insecure. If I expressed exhaustion, I was unsupportive. She even said, "Real partners don't nickel and dime each other," like my savings disappearing was some petty complaint. The worst part wasn't the words, it was how calm she was while saying them. Like she had rehearsed this. Like she'd already decided who I was in this story. I started questioning myself. Wondering if I really was overreacting. If maybe this was just what love looked like and I was too weak to handle it. I stopped sleeping. My chest felt tight all the time, like I was holding my breath without realizing it. I walked on eggshells in my own home, afraid that any question would trigger another lecture about how I was holding her back. That's when I realized I wasn't just being drained financially anymore. I was being worn down emotionally, slowly convinced that my fear, my limits, and my pain were character flaws. And deep down, something told me this wasn't going to end with a conversation. It was going to end with loss. She ended it 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday evening, like she was checking something off a list. I came home from work and found her sitting at the table with her laptop closed, hands folded, already emotionally gone. She didn't look nervous. She looked relieved. That was the first thing that broke me. "I've been thinking a lot," she said calmly. "I don't think this relationship is healthy anymore." I remember blinking at her, waiting for the rest, an explanation, an apology, something. Instead, she kept going. She said we were growing apart. That she needed independence. That my stress around money was changing the dynamic. Somehow, the years I spent holding everything together had become evidence that I was the problem. I didn't argue. I couldn't. My throat felt tight, like there was cotton stuffed in my chest. I asked one stupid question, "So what about everything we planned?" And she avoided my eyes. "Plans change," she said. Just like that. She packed fast. Too fast. Like she'd already decided long before that night. Watching her move through the apartment felt unreal, like a stranger touching my life. When the door closed behind her, the silence was so loud it made my ears ring. The next morning, reality hit. I opened my banking app and just stared. Almost nothing left. Savings gone. Emergency fund gone. Bills queued up like a countdown. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in my hands, feeling a kind of shame I didn't know how to name. Not just broke, but stupid. Used. Disposable. Friends texted. I ignored them. I didn't know how to explain that the person I'd built my life around had walked away once she didn't need me anymore. I boxed up our shared life alone, every object feeling heavier than it should have. At night, the apartment felt hollow. No laughter. No future talk. Just the hum of the fridge and the sound of my own breathing. I barely slept. When I did, I dreamed of numbers, of accounts draining, of reaching for something that wasn't there. That was rock bottom. Not just losing her, but realizing I'd given everything to someone who could leave without looking back. And I still hadn't figured out what I was going to do next. For a while after she left, I thought anger would be the thing that carried me forward. I expected to feel explosive, reckless, ready to burn everything down. Instead, something else happened. The anger came, and then it went quiet. Not gone, just compressed. Like it had sunk deep and hardened into something cold and deliberate. I remember sitting alone at the kitchen table one morning, sunlight coming through the blinds, dust floating in the air. My phone was face down. No messages. No explanations coming. And for the first time since the breakup, I didn't feel the urge to reach out. I didn't want answers anymore. I wanted control. So I started gathering things. Bank statements. Screenshots. Old emails. Transaction histories that told a story I hadn't wanted to see before. I spread the papers out on the table, the same table where we used to talk about our future, and felt this strange sense of calm settle over me. Pain was still there, but it wasn't driving anymore. I stopped responding to her entirely. No texts. No calls. No checking her social media. I blocked what I needed to block and deleted what I needed to delete. Not out of spite, out of survival. Every interaction felt like reopening a wound that was finally starting to close. I made appointments. Asked questions. Filed paperwork I never thought I'd have to file. I didn't tell her what I was doing. I didn't threaten. I didn't warn. I just handled it quietly, the way I'd always handled everything else, except this time, it was for myself. There were moments where doubt crept in. Late at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was being too harsh. If cutting contact made me the bad guy. But then I'd remember the numbers. The way she looked at me when I said I was scared. The ease with which she walked away. That doubt faded. What replaced it wasn't peace yet, but it was resolve. A steady, grounding feeling that told me I didn't need closure from her. I could build my own. I didn't know how long rebuilding would take. I didn't know who I'd be on the other side of it. But for the first time in a long time, my next move wasn't about supporting someone else. It was about protecting myself. Rebuilding didn't feel heroic. It felt humiliating, slow, and painfully quiet. There was no dramatic comeback montage, just early mornings, late nights, and a constant awareness of how fragile everything was. I went from planning a future with someone to counting every expense like it might be the one that broke me. I picked up extra shifts and freelance work wherever I could. I cut out anything that wasn't essential. Cheap meals. No nights out. No small comforts. I remember standing in the grocery store, calculator open on my phone, deciding between brands like my entire sense of safety depended on it, because it did. Every dollar felt heavy again, the way it used to before I let someone else decide its value. I started therapy, even though part of me wanted to pretend I was fine. Sitting in that quiet room, I finally said things out loud I'd been swallowing for years. How being the strong one had slowly erased my boundaries. How love had turned into obligation without me noticing. The more I talked, the more I realized how deeply I'd tied my worth to being needed. Some nights were harder than others. I'd come home exhausted, the apartment still half empty, and feel the urge to check her social media just to see if she missed me. I never did. I knew that reopening that door would cost me more than I could afford emotionally. Little by little, the numbers started changing. My balance stopped dropping. Then it stabilized. Then, slowly, it grew. Not enough to feel safe yet, but enough to breathe. I felt a quiet pride every time I transferred money into savings, even if it was a small amount. What surprised me most was how rebuilding my finances also rebuilt something inside me. Discipline turned into confidence. Silence turned into clarity. I wasn't just recovering, I was learning who I was without being someone's safety net. Still, part of me wondered if she would ever notice the version of me she left behind was gone. And whether she'd try to come back once she did. She noticed months later. I didn't know it at first, because I wasn't looking anymore. That was the difference. The version of me who checked his phone every 5 minutes was gone. My life had become smaller, quieter, but solid. And then one evening, after a long day, I unlocked my phone and saw her name on the screen. Just seeing it made my stomach tighten. The message was casual. Too casual. Hey. Hope you've been doing well. No apology. No acknowledgement. Like we were old co-workers, not two people who had shared a life and burned it down. I stared at the screen longer than I want to admit, feeling that old instinct rise, the one that wanted to explain, to be understood, to be seen as good. Then another message came. I heard you've been doing really well lately. That's when it clicked. She didn't miss me. She missed access. She missed the version of me that made her life easier, quieter, safer. The guy who paid without asking and stayed without demanding anything in return. And realizing that hurt in a different way, sharper, but cleaner. I didn't respond. Over the next few weeks, the messages changed tone. Friendly turned into curious. Curious turned into nostalgic. I was thinking about us. I hope there are no hard feelings. Each one felt like a test, like she was checking to see if the door was still unlocked. I never opened it. What shocked me wasn't how easy it was to ignore her, it was how much power that silence gave me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't trying to win. I just didn't need anything from her. And that terrified her in a way my words never could. One night, I typed out a response. Just a simple sentence. Something neutral. Something polite. My thumb hovered over the screen, my heart beating faster than it should have. Then I deleted it. Because for the first time, I understood something clearly. Closure didn't come from confrontation. It came from choosing myself, and refusing to give access to anyone who treated my sacrifice like a resource. Still, there was one final thing left to face. And I knew it would come when I least expected it. I didn't get my closure from a final conversation or some dramatic apology. It came quietly, on an ordinary morning, when I checked my account and realized I felt safe again. Not rich. Not ahead. Just, steady. And that feeling hit harder than anything she ever said to me. I'm still the same guy who believes in love, but I'm not the same guy who thinks love is proven through self-erasure. Looking back, I can finally see how slowly it happened, how being supportive turned into being emptied out. How praise like you're my rock slowly became permission to lean without ever standing back up. For a long time, I blamed myself. I told myself I should have seen it sooner, should have asked harder questions, should have protected myself better. Therapy helped me understand something important: manipulation doesn't always look cruel. Sometimes it looks grateful. Sometimes it looks like someone letting you carry everything while promising they'll take the weight later. What I rebuilt wasn't just my savings. It was my sense of worth. I learned that boundaries aren't punishments, they're protections. That partnership means balance, not endurance. And that someone who truly loves you won't be comfortable watching you drown for their success. I don't hate her. That surprised me the most. I just don't carry her anymore. Her choices are hers. The consequences aren't mine to manage. The silence between us isn't bitterness, it's peace. Now, when I think about the future, it doesn't feel like something I'm paying into blindly. It feels like something I'm walking toward with my eyes open. I take care of myself. I ask questions. I don't apologize for needing clarity or fairness. If there's one thing I wish I could tell the version of myself who thought sacrifice was the same as love, it's this. Love shouldn't leave you broke, financially or emotionally. And if walking away quietly is what it takes to rebuild your life, then walking away isn't weakness. It's the moment you finally choose yourself.